Welcome to another episode of Insights with Ovationz. I am Aaron Ellis, your host. You can find out about me at AaronEllisOfficial.com, as well as all my social media is AaronEllisOfficial.com. Today, I am joined with Michael Landers. Now, Michael is a founder of Culture Crossing LLC. His workshops, seminars, and speaking events have drawn over 100,000 people on 5 continents. He works with CEOs to college students in multiple different verticals: sales, engineering, marketing, design, hospitality, finance, education, and more. He's also a best-selling author and really an expert at cultivating and developing high-performing teams and organizations, and has worked with companies such as Amazon, Apple, Google, Uber, and many more. And for those of you in the know, he's also a fellow nobody. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks, Aaron. It's good to be here. Yes, I am a fellow nobody and proud of that.
Yes, we are fellow nobodies. I completely agree. So, even this morning, I was looking into what you talk about and stuff and your expertise and what we could share with the audience today. And even this morning, one of the Nobody Studios, the Nexus call, we talked about culture. And I know that's a big topic for you. And I'm curious on what you mean when you say culture. I've talked to many people on that term. I know what I have said. I know I've gone into organizations to speak on culture, and they're like, this is nothing like we expected. So I'm curious on your perspective on culture and what you do in that area.
Yeah, for sure. It's such a word. It's an important word. People use it a lot. And anytime you have a word that's used a lot, you have different meanings, right? And we have to, especially if we're building culture, cultivating culture, getting aligned on what it is. So, I'll give you a different perspective that I've been sitting with for many years around, which is at the end of the day, culture is a human construct. So we could say, essentially, it doesn't really exist. So it's a human construct, right? And what I mean by that is culture in my mind is a series of mental models. The way I see something, and I'm going to take like national culture. Hey, this is how we serve coffee in Colombia. This is how we choose to take our shoes off in Japan. And those series of behaviors get iterated and mirrored and repeated again and again for 10, 15, 20, 100, thousands of years. They become embedded into a culture. Mm-hmm. And very often when we go from a corporate culture from one to the other, what's different are the ways people define things. So at the end of the day, it's a series of mental models, and yet we get tied to our culture. We hold on to our culture. We fight against people who don't fit into our culture. We exclude, we include, and at the end of the day, they are just one mental model, one way of seeing or doing something. So that's what I see culture actually being, is at the end of the day, it's just a mental model. It iterates off of that, but that's how I tend to define it. And so when I work with people on cultivating cultures or crossing cultures or changing cultures, the first thing I want to look at is, how are you defining the certain aspects of your culture? What's your mental model going to be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very well put. Now, I'd love to even go a little bit deeper with this culture thing.
Please.
So I'll bring in some of the common threads that I see culture moving into. One of the common ones is like the diversity, DEI, right? Equity and inclusion, right? Yep. There's cultural issues there. I also see the culture of a sales team. I see the culture of communication. I see all those different things. And there's one thing that jumped out when I read that I look at when I've gone in, I really help people find that personal responsibility in how they're perceiving culture and how they're perceiving everything in the world, the relationship with themselves and how it's dictating their relationship with everything else. And one thing I pulled off of what I was reading from your content was, basically, I have in quotes, their own culture shapes their perceptions and behaviors. So can you speak towards that?
Yeah, our own culture shapes our perceptions and behaviors, right? So first up, one of the things that I really focus on in the work, if I could kind of drill down into what I feel like my purpose is, or what I really want to focus on, is the greatest gift you can give anybody is your self-awareness. Right? The greatest gift you can give anyone is self-awareness. That's a quote from gurus, prophets, you name it, for years. But I've always thought that that's important. And in the culture work, it's exactly that, directly related to what you shared. I see the world through my lenses. You see the world through yours. And my lenses were formed from my experiences, my perceptions, my expectations, all of those things. And so when I have and work with people who are having culture crashes that we look at, they're because our lenses are slightly different or very different. And so the work that I really do with people is getting them to become aware of their lenses. Because if you can't become aware of your lenses to begin with, then our challenge is I'm going to be constantly looking at things through my lenses, not yours.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're working with organizations and you start to help them make that shift, it's somewhat of a paradigm shift. They're looking at it from a different angle, looking at it in a different way. What are you finding as far as like roadblocks that you're hitting with teams or leadership? Or is this something that's just been smooth sailing for you when you bring it in? Like when you're bringing these
No, yeah.
aha or moments of satori to these organizations, like what are you finding as far as pushback and the shift from the old paradigms to what we're actually moving into?
Yeah, more consciousness, right? More
Yeah.
awareness, more connection. I see one of two things. Typically, people will reach out in the past because they're in crisis. Hey,
Mhm.
we're having this problem. We're having trouble with our Japanese market. We can't enter into this market. Our sales team is being faced with customers from other places. We don't like the culture of our customer service team, right? So we're having a problem. Let's bring somebody in. And then sometimes we have people who are like, hey, we want to cultivate the right thing. Let's bring somebody in. And so depending on when I'm brought in, I might have different experiences. When there's a big pain point and I can come in and share, hey, this is where it's probably coming from. And then the aha goes, it's an easier move over. But in general, I think when I'm working with leaders, one of the things I think I'm really brought into is to show a mirror. Hey,
Mm.
this is what I'm seeing in you. This is what I'm seeing in your company. This is what I'm seeing in your culture. And I joke about this, but it's pretty true. One of three things tends to happen. One, I show the mirror and they're like, oh my God, my hair's a mess. Let me fix that. Right. And we
Yeah.
like those clients because this is wonderful. We're doing work. They see it, they acknowledge it, they want to take an active part in fixing it or improving it. And then there you go. The other ones are like, look at the mirror and throw something at it and it breaks. Okay. I don't
Mhm.
like that. I don't know what's going on. And the third thing that happens every once in a while is they throw something at the mirror, the shards of glass fall on the floor. They pick up the shards, not to be too graphic, but they stab the person holding the mirror. That's
Mm.
me. And then they're like, I don't think we want to work with this person anymore. And I can see those coming. And believe it or not, the more where I see that happening and where I've experienced that more often, by the way, I'm not saying I get fired all the time, but when that does happen,
Right.
it's usually in startups.
Ah.
Okay. It's usually in startups because there might be founders, leaders as they're growing from 50 to 100 or 25 to 50 who aren't super confident in themselves yet. And when we show them that of what they're building, they're like, no, 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 no. Who brought this guy in? Get him out of here. And I can usually anticipate that. And I'll tell the people who brought me in, if it wasn't the founder, this is what's going to happen. Luckily, over the years, I've started to see that prior, so I might not engage with the client before that happens. But it's a natural thing, right? In life, if I show you what someone sees, if we show an accurate mirror of you, you might be like, I don't want to see that. I don't like that. I don't agree with that. I want to run away from that. So those are the kind of things that tend to happen for me.
I love that. You really actually went into another one of the thoughts I was having around this, as far as how you can help people shift. And you already spoke about self awareness. That's a huge thing. And we also talked about, in business, I'm a startup junkie. I love working with startups because one of the reasons is I love problems. I just love
Yeah.
problems. Like
Yeah.
I really embrace the fail forward, fail fast, like as fast as I can. Like let me do that. I'll be the one that smashes into the wall with my head. I'm happy to do it, right?
Let's
And a
go.
lot of people aren't like that. They're not. There's so much of an identity around what they're doing, and if it's good or bad or right or wrong, or they are good, bad, right, or wrong around that. Now, I know I'm kind of digressing a little bit, but I want to bring this back to two words that I've brought into organizations that a lot of people confuse and they don't understand the difference between it. And I know that you have something to say about this, but the difference between accountability and responsibility.
Yeah. That's a big one, right? First off, tell me a little bit, Aaron, like when you hear the word accountability, in what context have you heard it over the years?
So accountability, usually like in an organization, I'm hearing it about having to do with specific tasks that are having to be done. There's dependencies across the different organizations, and there has to be accountability to keep the machine running, to keep everything going forward. I take it a lot different. Like, as I said in the beginning, when I think of everything as the personal relationship first, like insight into myself. How am I relating to this? As I expand how I relate to it within myself, I naturally expand outwardly how I relate to it with others and other things. So, but how I usually hear about it, how it's usually addressed is around that accountability end. And then you have the people saying, well, I know I'm accountable to get this done, but they're not getting their part done. So they go, it's that whole responsibility, accountability thing where they're mixing the two. And again, they're not seeking personal accountability or responsibility. They're usually pointing outward in a defensive way.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I 100% agree. I think the other thing I always hear is we need to hold people accountable,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Hold people accountable. And I get the concept. So I've been doing workshops on accountability for many years. And interesting enough, a lot of them started in Latin America. I'm originally from Boston. I'm American. Parents both from Boston, but I grew up in Latin America my whole life because my parents' work took us to different countries: Colombia, Brazil, Dominican Republic. So I speak Spanish and Portuguese and regularly work in those languages. So I was tasked many years ago to start doing accountability workshops for a large financial institution throughout Latin America. And I was like, okay, yeah, cool. I got this. We got this. We're going to talk about the difference between the two words and how important it is. And they're like, and then I started doing my research. I'm like, wait a minute. There's no word for accountability in Spanish or Portuguese. Like it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. There's no translation, literal translation for it. So I was like, well, that's going to be interesting. Does that mean that the people in those countries aren't accountable? And I was like, no. But I had to start the workshop with defining it. And that was really the core, because it really, in some ways, was an easier lift because we could really define these words and concepts and get people to understand the difference between the two. They got responsibility. Responsibility is a word that in Spanish and Portuguese and many other languages. But in the United States, what happened was everyone had a different definition for accountability to a person on a C-suite team in the same company.
Yeah.
Right. I would start the workshop. How do you define accountability? All across the board. And so I was like, that's fine. The purpose of what we're going to do today is align and agree on one way to look at it. And so in doing those workshops, what we found is responsibility was best understood as an obligation to act.
Mm-hmm.
And you hire people, you see the responsibilities in the job description. If you come to work here at Ovationz, if you come here to Nobody, here's what you're responsible for. And I can hold you responsible as a boss or as a colleague to say, hey, Michael, did you do this? Yes, great. That's easy. We get less confused with responsibilities. We can reprimand people. We can punish. We can reward if they do it. But when it came to accountability, what I realized was you had an opportunity to answer for an action that typically wasn't your responsibility. And so a simple thing goes with, there's a wastebasket in the middle of the office and there's papers all around it because it got overflowed. And it's no one's responsibility to clean it up except the person who services the trash and the common areas. You're walking by, employee, whatever, Aaron, you're general manager, director, whatever it is. Do you pick up the papers? And you could say that and go, it's not your responsibility to do it, but do you want to answer for the action that other person who was supposed to do it didn't necessarily do it in that moment, right? Oh. And sometimes what falls in the accountability zone is nobody's responsibility. And it's an individual choice for you to say, I'm going to take that. I'm going to pick that up. Yeah, it's not my team, and I'm not going to blame the other team, but it wasn't defined whose it was, but I'm going to take that action. And that's really kind of what we look at. So when I look at high-performing cultures, especially in the startup world, I'm always interested because early on in startups, and Aaron, I'm curious if you see this, but in early startups, like your 5, 10, 15, guess what? No accountability problems. People are overly accountable because everyone's wearing multiple hats.
Yeah.
In some ways, sometimes the responsibilities drop because we're putting out all these fires that we forgot to. Oh no, what about your job? Oh yeah, I've been doing all this other stuff. But then the companies get larger, accountability issues, because there's gray area. And so that's kind of that's how I look at it. And then when you want to cultivate a culture of accountability, which most companies, most startups that I work with and companies, accountability is in their values. Yeah. Be accountable, live accountable, don't forget to win accountable. And yet they have different definitions for it. So when you really cultivate a culture of accountability, getting aligned on that definition, and then starting to see, hey, who's going to answer for this? When I see high performing teams, they ask those questions, not judging, not shaming. They say, this happened. Who's going to answer for this? How are we going to respond to this? Because it's no one's responsibility, but we have an opportunity to answer for what happened. So that's how I look at it.
I love that. That's a different, it's exactly, I completely agree with what you're saying. I've said it in different ways, but you said it in a different way, which actually made me say, oh, Wow. I got to know how many. I love that. And just for the listeners out there, because Michael and I are kind of going a little deep here. There's a difference in, let's simplify it here. There's subjective reality and there's objective reality. There's what is, and then there's the story told about it. We're talking about the story told about different words and different ways of doing things. And I always like to bring up pizza. Michael and I can say we both love pizza, but we're going to have different versions of pizza, different places we've eaten it at, different kinds of crusts, our favorite sauces, favorite toppings, experiences, but we can both meet and agree on pizza. And then from there, we can decide, well, which place we want to go to. Do you want to split a pizza or get separate ones, right? And neither one of us are going to stomp out saying he doesn't like my kind of pizza, I'm not going to work with him. You know, if we can approach all these other issues from that level, from that objective neutrality where we find agreement, and then we work with each other on how we flow through those perceivable disagreements, but really they're just differences, right? They're opposites, but we don't need opposition, right? Then we can, from my experience, create this culture that thrives rather than
100%. 100%. I love that. And like I love talking about pizza, right? Because it's just, there are so many differences. And so it's interesting. I could say embedded in that is judgment, right? Oh, now Detroit pizza is too square. New York pizza is too greasy. Bar pizza is too flat. I don't like the pizza in that place. The pepperoni's too spicy. Or I love the pizza over there because their crust is sourdough and sourdough is so chewy. And so when we look at it, at the end of the day, I'm going to take it to another level of depth. I love how you started that with objective and subjective. But guess what? That pizza's not spicy. That pizza's not delicious. That pizza's not square. That pizza's not flat. That pizza just is.
Yep.
And that's it is. Everything just is. I'm going to share all my perceptions and experiences and judgments based on my experiences to label it one way or the other. But if we can get to an agreement that it's just pizza, just is, then afterwards we can decide preferences. You and I can connect.
I absolutely love that. And on so many areas of life, people do connect that way. I can share how amazing this pizza was that I had, and you'll listen and maybe even like start salivating and stuff, but you're not tied to my belief on that. Because I'm not tied to it. I don't have a false identity in my style of pizza. Therefore, I'm not projecting a false identity of pizza on you. And so there's no judgment, right?
Yep.
There's a neutral or an objective comparison, if anything, right? So, and we can go down that rabbit hole quite a bit forever, I think, on this stuff.
I think we're like, for those of you fans of Zen of motorcycle maintenance, this is not the Zen of pizza, but it could be. All right, go ahead.
Maybe we've stumbled onto something new here. So we got a few minutes left here. Michael, I love to also hear about just the personal side of people. So tell us who you are personally. What do you like to do? Is there family, children? Like, who are you on a personal level? Even though I understand it flows into all your professional stuff, but
yeah, I think I'm confused. I'm confused at a personal level, and again, part of me just growing up, I grew up as a TCK, which is the third culture kid, right? You're from one country, but you spent your formative years, in my case, from 3 to 18 in other countries. So your identity gets a little confused because this third culture arises, right? Where I can be totally comfortable in the States and I can be somewhat comfortable in these other countries, but my true nature is somewhere in between. And it's that third culture kid. So that's kind of how I grew up. So every time someone says, hey, where are you from? I have a 15-second answer, a minute answer, and a 3-minute answer.
Yep.
And that's but it's good. It's kind of formed who I am. It formed the work that I've done. I'm married. I have a 14-year-old daughter. We live in Colombia now, started since last August, just so I could have my daughter have the experience that I did growing up overseas. And what do I enjoy? I enjoy nature a lot. I enjoy being the minority as much as I can. And I kind of grew up as a minority. And so that's kind of a difficult experience for a lot of people. And a lot of people would be like, oh, why would you want that? But for me, it really allows me to kind of recognize differences in others, understand my privilege and when I'm in the majority, and also just makes me learn, right? When everyone around you is not like you or doing the things, I'm really kind of interested to be a better observer of things. So those are the kind of things that I love to really do. And anytime I can be immersed in another culture, interact with people, and culture doesn't just have to be national, really just like interacting and finding people. I think the other thing that I've been sitting with lately is a quote that I read from a book a couple months ago, which was saying that my relationship with you is not how you see you, but how I see you. right? It might be a little deep, but what I'm recognizing is all my relationships with people throughout my life is how I see them, not how they see themselves. And so as I look to build new relationships, and I appreciate kind of the questions you've been asking as we've been talking, is trying to get to understand you, not from you from me.
I love that. I absolutely love that. I almost don't want to ask you this final question because that's a great ending point. But
It's okay. We can edit it.
Yeah, that's true. I do love to hear a final thought, final insight from you. Like if it was the only thing you could leave people with, what it would be. And of course, I want it to just whatever arises is perfect.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I tend to kind of come back to, at end of sessions, workshops, interacting with people, is just recognizing that ability to see how I tend to treat people the way I want to be treated versus the way they want to be treated. And it's a small shift, but a lot of us have been raised to say, I'm going to treat you the way I want to be treated. We know that golden rule, and it comes from respect and love. But in reality, it comes from a time when everything was homogeneous. Everyone was the same, small little villages, Bible times. And it's just not that case now, right? We're so diverse. Personality, neurodiversity, identity diversity, like all of these things. And so if I'm treating people the way I want to be treated, that assumption is wrong. And so I tell people, you can't treat everybody the way they want to be treated, but at the very least, you can ask. And if we all just asked a bit more, not to get too kumbaya, but if we just asked a little bit more of like, hey, Aaron, how do you like your pizza? Right? I'm going to get data. I'm going to get data from you that how you see things. And if I can treat you that way, it's a win. So that would be my last thing.
You can always ask. I love that.
You can always ask. You can always ask.
That. That's great.
You can always ask. Michael, I can't promise I'll do it, but we can ask.
100%, man. I really appreciate you taking your time today. It's been a pleasure and a blessing. And I think we could probably go on for hours here and stuff. And I know we will off camera and stuff. So
yes.
Appreciate you, man. And everybody, once again, thank you for spending some time with us on Insights with Ovationz. I recommend and encourage you to go back and listen to this again and again and pick up the little nuggets and see the structural integrity really in Michael and what he does. And if you want to learn more about Ovationz, head over to ovationz.com. You can also look up Michael and his profile there and learn more about him and bring him into your organization. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.